Artists around the world, teaching artists around the world. Artists around the world, teaching artists around the world. Artists around the world, teaching artists around the world. Artists around the world, teaching artists around.
And, you know, for the record, people kind of trickle in and stuff. Everyone's in different time zones. Jacopo, thank you so much for joining us. Marinella, thanks for coordinating this. Like-minded spirits in this whatever place, this, you know, we'd like to say that this, we've noticed during the pandemic, this, whatever this is, this internet thing, doesn't just connect cities, it connects living rooms. And it connects domestic space with domestic space, which is a very intimate world that's seemingly ubiquitous, but it's also seemingly very personal. And certainly that is the vibe at the school. And so it's wonderful to spend this intimate time with you, Jacopo, in the most busy time, in the most crazy times. One probably gets a Nobel Prize for producing any art event during the pandemic. And certainly it's been difficult everywhere, but certainly Brazil has not been spared in any short order. It's been a really brutal time politically and now on a health level, and both of those things combined for various reasons. So we're excited to have you here. And Marinella, our most sympathetic and emotionally giving of our instructors, it's a delight to have you. So welcome both of you, and thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neto. Thank you very much. I want also to thank you, Jacopo, for the very short notice. I give you this invitation, and thank you very much. I appreciate that. If you are okay with that, I would like that Jacopo start, because of course we are all very curious about the biennial. I'm also in the biennial, and I'm very happy to be there. And so then Jacopo and I will, after half an hour, we can discuss more in depth about also my practice, etc. Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. So I will share my screen because I have a presentation. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is the title of the exhibition. I'm sorry, I just noticed I have the Portuguese one, but as Marinella said, it was a very short notice, so I hope you will be very you will understand if there are faults. But anyway, the title is Faz escuro, mas eu canto, which in English we translated as Though it's dark, still I sing. You can see it here. And the first thing, well, let's say on the presentation, the way I structured is I will just give a brief introduction on how it was planned at the start. But then since we actually opened a month ago, I will basically focus on the exhibition itself. So with images of the show and a little bit of an explanation also of how the exhibition is structured from a curatorial point of view, and how you sort of feel going through it. So the first thing to be said, which I think is probably one of the key ideas of the project, is that it was supposed from the start to last way more than the usual time of São Paulo Biennial, which is usually 3 months from September to December. And it was supposed to happen last year. So from September 5th to December 6th, if I remember correctly, something like that. But the main exhibition, but we already started in February of last year with the first of 3 planned performances. The first one was a music presentation by Neo Moyanga, who is a musician from South Africa, and a solo exhibition by Jimena Garrido Leca, who is a Peruvian artist. And these 2 moments, the performance and the solo show, were supposed to be the first of 3 performances and 3 solo shows that would happen in the Biennial Pavilion, which is a very, very large pavilion, large building. You will see some images now, throughout the year. So the first one was in February, then we would have another one in late April, then another one in July, and then the main show in September. And the idea behind that was that we wanted people to see the works by those artists in different contexts and in different moments, and be sort of very naturally led to do different readings of those works, because this is one of the key ideas behind this exhibition. It was planned from the start as being an exhibition in process, and this process we made several different efforts, in several ways, to make it as transparent and as visible as possible to follow it for the audience on a large scale. And the idea of doing the exhibition, these solo exhibitions before, was also an idea of sort of rehearsing the exhibition, the main exhibition that we would then do in September. So when the pandemic came, we had to cancel the second and third solo exhibition and performances, but we were able to do what you see here in November 2020, an exhibition which was called Wind, and which was, I think, a very special exhibition for the audience, but for us as well, in this idea of rehearsing the biennial and making things that sort of leads you to then propose a specific exhibition. It was a very important moment, because it was a time in Brazil, I think around the world, but especially in Brazil, I would say, a moment when the pandemic sort of got a little bit better, not as good as it is now, of course, but most institutions in São Paulo were able to open again. So there was a little bit of an art scene going on, and we were able to do the exhibition. But what was really special about this one is that we had 21 artists in the whole pavilion, which, as I said, is a huge space, and we didn't build any wall. So all the works were actually placed in a much more direct contact and relation with the architecture of the pavilion compared to how they usually are. And this was very important for us, first, in this idea of a rehearsal of the exhibition, because we actually learned a lot of how we were sort of comfortable with the way the videos and the sound pieces would sort of permeate the whole space and even contaminate one with the other. But it was also a very special exhibition, I think, because immediately you felt as a visitor that this was sort of a unique exhibition, in the sense that not just in this pavilion, but I would say anywhere, it's almost impossible to see an exhibition where the space, the empty space, is immensely more than the space occupied by the works. We usually have the opposite relation. You have to feel the space as much as possible. In this case, the empty space was actually way more than the space occupied by the works, even though the works sometimes they could reverberate throughout the building. So many people understood what we wanted to suggest through this, is that it was sort of a portrait of the moment that we were living at the time, but not in a direct way, but by the exceptionality of the show, in a way, the way it was done, and the space between the works and how things were sort of breathing there. And then we came, so through all these and through a quite intense series of digital program as well, to the exhibition that opened last month, and that we can see now a little bit more in detail. So to begin with, to give you an idea, I wanted to show you a little bit of the architecture. The architecture was done by a studio here in São Paulo, Andrade Moretin. And the interesting thing is that they proposed these skins, we call them, in different degrees of opacity. So we have a plexiglass one, which is, of course, lets the light go through, but it doesn't let you actually see through it. Then we have, as you can see here, some that are more transparent, is a textile, juta. So it's very transparent. And then we also have, like here, these wooden panels that close the space that are climate controlled. Not the whole building is climate controlled, but where it is, we needed this more opaque closing. And what the architects suggested, or what they wanted to achieve through this, was that they understand, which is perfectly obvious in a way when somebody tells you that, let's say, but it's not so easy to grasp at the beginning, that the scale of the building is actually a urban scale. And then in this urban scale, by creating these skins, they created pavilions which are, each of them, as big as an institution like a Kunsthalle or a museum or a mid-scale museum, let's say, but compared to the scale of the pavilion, they're still relatively small. And what happens by creating this enclosed space is that, especially the smaller works, they sort of feel much more protected, let's say, that they usually do in a biennial when you only have this kind of walls, lower walls to hang works, and you don't have really this big but enclosed space that sort of give you sort of an intimacy that is much needed, especially by smaller scale works. And then the large scale works, like Marinella that we see later, they can, and which are to some extent also conceived as almost urban interventions, they can deal with the scale of the building. So they are outside of these schemes. And then the other thing that this architecture allowed us to do is to sort of work with specific themes or issues that we wanted to touch upon, but that they're not overarching. So they're not the theme of the biennial. So going back a little bit to the title for us, again, though it's dark, still I sing, works as an introduction, not really to the themes or to the things that you will see in the exhibition, but to the way that we as curatorial team conceive the exhibition. So this is a verse by a Brazilian poet, Tiago de Mello, and it was written in 1963, so a few months before the military coup that led to dictatorship in Brazil in the 1960s, and already in a very tense moment. And it's a beautiful verse, I think, because it gives you an idea of, with the two moments of the words, of the verse, though it's dark, still I sing. In the first part of the verse, it sort of situates very clearly how conscious the poet was, and we think we are, of the moment that we're living, of how dramatic and how threatening this moment is. But at the same time, Tiago de Mello defends the right and the need to also sing in those moments, which is something that is not very obvious, and it's also not so easy to do. In a way, when we're living in such complex and challenging times, we feel that to some extent we should only talk about this. We shouldn't sing, we shouldn't do art, we shouldn't do poetry, we shouldn't think of other things, which is not fighting for a better world. And in a way, one of the things that we defend in the biennial is that there is space, there must be space also for other things. But as I said, this is not a theme. It's more, just as the methodology that I described at the beginning, is more of a hint of how we as curators worked on the preparation of the Biennale. But then throughout the biennial, there is a series of moments or hints and suggestions of specific readings that we suggest of the works that are placed in the biennial. And these moments are gathered around what we've been calling statements. And these statements are objects or images or ideas that come from outside of the artwork, of the specificities of the artwork, but they sort of bring stories and historical episodes and ideas that we think can make the works around them resonate in a very specific way. So the way I prepared the tour, let's say, in the biennial today is by showing some of those statements and the works around them for you to understand a little bit how the biennial as a whole is structured. I have, I think, 4 or 5 of those statements. In total, it's 14. So you can get an idea, let's say, of the scale of the exhibition. So the first statement for you to understand a little bit how this works is a group of 3 objects from the Museu Nacional. The Museu Nacional in Rio de Janeiro is a historical museum that was burned almost entirely. The whole collection, or the vast majority of the collection, was lost exactly 3 years ago, actually exactly 2 days before the opening of the last biennial. So there is even a connection in that sense. And what we did, we brought 3 different objects from this collection. So the first one is a meteorite called Santa Luzia. It's the 2nd largest meteorite in Brazil and one of the largest in the world. And of course, it's an interesting object in itself, the idea of something that was traveling through space for thousands of years and then landed on Earth. But it's also interesting to think that the temperature that this object endured when entering the atmosphere were actually much higher than what it had to endure in the fire. So in a way, the fire itself was not really a big issue in the history of the meteorite. So it was left absolutely exactly as it was before. Then on the back, or together with it, we have two more objects. One is this citrine, which is a variety, it's a specific kind of quartz. But the interesting thing is that before the fire, it was a different kind of quartz. It was an amethyst. But then by the fact that it had to stay at such high temperature for such a long time, it transformed chemically, which is not an unknown process, let's say, it's known. But in this case, I think it's fascinating to think that it becomes an index of the fire. The stone is the same stone, but it's only the same stone because it was able to transform and it wasn't destroyed in a way. And then the last object that we have from the Museo Nacional is this doll from the Carajá ethnic group from the Amazon. The original one, together with other objects from this group, was destroyed in the fire, and they donated another one because, in a very different approach to an object in the museum from the conventional Western idea of an object that it's very specific in itself, they consider that the object itself is just important in what it carries of cultural and ritual values. So they just donated another one. So when you think about it, it's a group of 3 different objects that went through that fire in entirely different ways. And then around it, we have a lot of works, a consistent group of works that deal in very different ways, either more directly or more indirectly, with the idea of resilience, resistance, enduring traumas, fighting against very difficult situations. So again, a little bit as in the title, it was a way of introducing some of the key aspects of the moments that we're living in and some of the traumas that we have been enduring. Also, if you want, comparing the biennial and other cultural institutions to what the Museo Nacional had to endure itself. But then around it, the works are not directly addressing the same topics. They're just, in a way, it is as if those statements and the text that we write upon them is like creating a chord or making a tone that sort of makes all the works around them resonate in specific ways. So this work here, this very large work, is a work by Carmela Gross, who is an important Brazilian artist, already in her 70s. Then around it, Epe Itso from Denmark, some works by Frida Urupabo, both Nigerian and Norwegian artists. So in this case, addressing colonial and post-colonial issues. In this case, this is a series of photos taken in a squat when they had to close all the windows to protect themselves from the police coming in. And then going up, we have other works going up on the mezzanine, from where you can look at the view that we had before of the objects from the Museo Nacional. And then we had this work, which in a completely different way talks about resistance in the work, which is a film by John Jonas, which is called Wind. And this is one of the works that we had already shown. As I said before, this idea of showing works more than once. This work was shown in the Wind exhibition that I mentioned before, which was actually titled Wind because of this work. Because in a way, I don't know if you've ever seen this video, it's a quite short video of a performance that John Jonas did in 1968 in Long Island. And basically the performers, they're trying to do a choreography, but they're actually fighting against this very strong wind. So there is a resistance there, and there is a rehearsal, which is also an important term for us, as I said, of doing the choreography. But it's also very fascinating how in this very dry and arid landscape, the presence of the performers is what makes the wind visible, because otherwise you just wouldn't see it, because there's no tree, there's nothing. And this was something that was very important in the Wind exhibition, the idea of having very few things that make you perceive the space and the moment that you're living in a very specific way. But then again, the idea of seeing the work again several months later in a different context, but again addressing issues of resistance, which were of course very much in place in the Wind exhibition, which was for us a very strong and touching way of sort of beginning the exhibition, because this part of the exhibition that I'm showing now is really at the start, at the beginning of the exhibition. going on to another one of the statements is a series that you can see here of 120 of the about 150 portraits that were done of Frederick Douglass throughout his life. I'm sure you know, or most of you, who Frederick Douglass was. He was one of the most important names in the fight for abolition of slavery in the US in the 19th century. But what is maybe less known, but just as relevant in the context of an art exhibition, is that he was also a very important critic and theoretician of photography, and he was the most photographed man in the 19th century in the US, because he was very conscious about the importance of his image as a very handsome and serious and prepared and charismatic black man at that time to circulate. So around those, or looked upon, let's say, by the portraits of Frederick Douglass, we have a series of works that in very different ways talk about the idea of circulation. So we start from the idea of circulation of images, which is something that, as I said, is very important in Frederick Douglass' practice and theory. But then we talk about circulation of capital, of bodies, migrations, circulation of ideas throughout centuries and throughout the world. So it's, again, a very broad approach to the idea of circulation, which is which gathers works that are around all this area here. So it's a very big area, and this large space is connected by this intervention by Arjan Martins, this installation, which sort of draws a triangle with this cord, with this cord from a ship. And the idea of the triangle also relates to the idea of the Atlantic Triangle that the ships carrying enslaved people at the time were drawing, so to say. So it directly relates to what Frederick Douglass was fighting against at the time. And it sort of connects this very large space where we have works that, as in this case, a work by Alfredo Jar, relate or talk about the circulation of images and how this today is still an immensely relevant issue in a totally different context, if you want, from Frederick Douglass times, but still very much relevant. And then, as you can see, Jar was here behind, and in the front is Paulo Capella, very important artist from Angola, who unfortunately passed away because of COVID when we were working on the exhibition, so we couldn't have him physically in the space. So this also became sort of a homage to his work. And then on the other side, exactly in front of Capella, and on, let's say, on the other side of Frederick Douglass portraits, there was this, there is this work by Tony Coates, which is, you're probably all familiar with Tony Coates' work. He's an artist who works mainly with video, and in basically all of his recent videos, there are no images. And in this specific work, in special, he's talking about, or is defending, or is suggesting a theory that the only way that a revolution can really happen is when there are no images, when imagination is left free to imagine what the situations are, and especially what the situation could become, which is a very fascinating way, I think, to end this group of works that starts with a very strong emphasis on images with Frederick Douglass and with Alfredo Jar and with other works, and then it sort of ends defending what could be, in a way, an opposite way of thinking about the importance or the burden that images can be. So this is a way of explaining, as I said before, how starting from one of those statements or from each of those statements, we always try to have different works addressing those ideas or suggesting different readings of those ideas. Another one is this dedication from Constantin Brancusi, which is a very poetic but also very intimate dedication that he did when he went to the US in 1926 to do an exhibition in the Brummer Gallery in New York. This was November 26, and in the same weeks, basically, Tarsila do Amaral and Oswald de Andrade, who are two very important Well, Tarsila de Amaral is a very important modernist artist, and Oswald de Andrade is mainly a critic and writer, also from that time. And they befriended Brancusi in Paris, and Brancusi so dedicates a catalog to them because they were getting married basically the same week of the opening of the exhibition. So this is a way to introduce a part of the exhibition where we suggest relations between works and between artists that are in some cases more coherent, let's say, from a point of view of the history of art, and in other more surprising, if you want, but still, I believe, quite fascinating or quite suggesting. So the first room, which has a very direct connection with Tarsila do Amaral and Oswald de Andrade, is this one. So on the back here, you see works by Ligia Pape, who is one of the most important neo-concrete artists. So these works are a little bit later, not really the high neo-concrete movement moment. So in the end of the 50s, the 60s, these are from the 80s. And then here in the middle of the room is a work by Dayara Tucano, who is an indigenous artist, an indigenous contemporary artist. And in this room, I think it's a very beautiful progression, if you want, from Tarsila do Amaral and Oswald de Andrade, who, as I said, are very important names in Brazilian modernism. And as you might know, the Brazilian modernism is one of the first moments in Brazilian history and culture where the still almost entirely white intelligentsia was looking at indigenous culture. You might know of the fascination that this group had with the idea of anthropophagy, at least, among other influences. And then in the case of Ligia Pape in the 60s and then in the 80s, with this specific series of work, which is called Amazonino, again, there is this attempt to get in touch and to understand and to explore indigenous culture and indigenous ideas. But then it's only in the middle of the room with Dayara Tucano, who is one of the many indigenous artists, both from Brazil and from other places that we have in this exhibition. It's only here that we really have an indigenous contemporary production placed in the exhibition without any kind of translation or betrayal. As we all know, translations always carry a degree of betrayal and of not understanding and not being able to translate entirely what the other is saying. So it's a very linear progression, if you want, from the modernist time to the neo-concrete to actually the first time. I don't mean the first time in this biennial, but historically, this is the first time where these productions are being really given the space that they deserve without any kind of translation or any kind of appropriation also, if you want. So this is a more linear connection that is done, but then in other rooms also connected ideally by Brancusi's dedication. We have, for instance, this relation between Wan Qiao, who is a quite young Chinese artist, and John Jonas' snake drawing. So two entirely different approaches to art. This is very synthetic, if you want, and this is more free and performatic, but they both have an idea of animism in a way embedded in the words that makes an interesting connection. And in this other room is also very suggesting, I think, juxtaposition. Here is a series of paintings by Morandi, whom you all know. And this is Annabella Pap, a very young Romanian artist who also, a little bit like Morandi, works always with the same kind of materials and always in very small dimensions, always with this, almost always in the exact same measures. They're plates of clay which are unfired, so very delicate and very fragile as well. So also in this room was Christopher Sava, who's an artist from Cyprus, also from the beginning of from the mid 20th century. So a series of very surprising connections, if you want, if you look at them from a very conventional art history point of view, but that they bring the idea of connections that are made by artists in different contexts, from different times, from different places, and also using different techniques. Another one of those statements is those embroideries by João Cândido. João Cândido was one of the leader of a very important uprising in the Brazilian Navy for better condition for the Navy soldier. I don't know exactly how you call them, because at this time, at the beginning of the 20th century, basically all the officers were white and all the rest of the Navy was made up by black people, and the white officers had the right to use also physical violence on them to punish them, basically at their own discretion. And what happens is that João Cândido, together with other Navy soldiers, led a revolt, which is called as Revolta da Chibata, so the Whip Revolt, and they were able to get better conditions, and they were also forgiven in theory for the revolt. But then a few weeks later, all of them were put in jail, including João Cândido. And then in jail, João Cândido created these embroideries, which are amazing, but they're also very surprising. The idea of a violent hero who was brave enough to fight for his rights and of his mates, and then to imagine him doing this very romantic and poetic embroideries in jail is for us the starting point of a part of the exhibition that talks about how very often by being enclosed in a cave or in exile or in your home or in very specific place, you can produce works that address much larger issues, and you also get, in a way, a freedom that in a public context maybe you wouldn't have. So this is one of the strongest rooms, I think, in the exhibition. Is a series of works by Antonio Diaz, who is a Brazilian artist who in 1967, so a few months before the worst moment of Brazilian dictatorship, went to Paris and then to Italy, and he basically spent his whole life in Italy. And he created these very large black paintings that were actually never seen in such a large group in Brazil, because the work stayed in Italy until now. And they address with these writings very often the idea of, again, a resistance to the political context. And then we placed in relation to that work by Annika Mali, who is a very young Swedish artist of Iranian descent, who also has an abstract work like Antonio Diaz, but that also refers to state violence in this case, because all the works are entitled they have the name of somebody who was a victim of state violence in different places and in different times. So there is a very fascinating relation, I think, between the two. These abstract works that somehow address social and political issues. Another one of those statements is these vases, let's say, these pots, but it's basically the way they are read nowadays by Mariane Salum and Francisco Silva, who are two professors and who have researched that a lot to show how the original way of doing pottery in Brazil was not destroyed as it is usually said, let's say, by the official historiography when the Portuguese colonizers arrived, but it was actually able to survive in very specific techniques. And this was a way of cultural endurance, let's say, from the part of the Tupiniquim people to make their techniques and their way of producing the pottery survive by adapting to what the colonizers were bringing and transforming it from the inside. So this selection goes, these ones here are very old, they're before the colonial time, and the last one are from the end of the 19th century. And when you read and you understand, you can see how it's not a radical change, and what might look like a radical change is in fact a history of resistance. So this is the last, in the way the exhibition is installed, this is the last statement that you find. And in a way it relates to the very beginning, to the Museo Nacional that I was showing before. And close to this, we have Jimena Garrido Leca's work and Junjin Lee. These are photos from Buddhas in Korea, amazing pictures, amazing photos. But the work that I wanted to talk more about is this one, because as I said, Jimena Garrido Lecas is the only solo exhibition that we were able to do in February 2020. So already almost 2 years ago. And this work with alive plants growing in the space has been there for the last 2 years, basically. And whoever visited the biennial in February 2020, then in November 2020, and is visiting it now in September, October 2021, has seen these plants growing. And then the idea that I mentioned before that we wanted to achieve through this exhibition, that you really feel that things change in a way dramatically, and that the way you understand a work is very much influenced by the way everything around this specific work changes. It's, to me, made very clear by this work, because it's a work that by having live plants, it already changes in itself. But through everything that happens in the last months, for everybody who has seen it, but also hasn't seen it, but reads about it and understands about it, these ideas that at the beginning were maybe just a curatorial strategy are now something that is very, very present, I think, in all of us life in the last month. So the idea that this work was in the pavilion throughout this very long months, almost 20 months, let's say, is a very strong one. And then close to this, we have other works that deal, again, as I said before, with this idea of resistance, of restoring, of caring, of looking back at history through archaeology, through cultural values, and so on. And then the last statement that I wanted to talk about is has as a starting point Paulo Freire, who was a Brazilian educator. I'm sure many of you at least know about him. So what we did, we took the idea of the circle, which is very present in Paulo Freire's work, and especially the idea of a pedagogy that is never top down, is never one people teaching the rest and expecting that they learn, but a group of people, often in a circle, learning one from the other and exchanging. And around this, we have a series of works that in very different ways relate with the idea of an expanded field of communal learning and sharing. So we have Clara Yanni's installation here that use pedagogical material, but it then turns it into both three-dimensional and bidimensional sculptures. Eleonora Fabião, this is the result of a very long, 2 weeks long series of exchanges and performances, bringing all these chairs from different institutions in São Paulo. And then these chairs will be given back, each of them to a different institution, sort of making them come together. And during the biennial, we will have representatives from those institutions coming here. And again, a little bit in a Paulo Freire way, sharing knowledges and experiences. Jaidras Bell, probably the most articulated, at least, if not most important, of the indigenous contemporary artists that we have in the biennial. Here is a work that he did in a school from his community in Roraima in the north of Brazil. Darcy Lange, a New Zealand artist who made in the 70s these studies of work in schools. And then finally, our beloved Marinella, who can maybe talk a little bit about this work, because I think I've talked already way more than I was supposed to. So maybe Marinella, maybe you can describe a little bit how this was done and conceived and what it means.
Sure. This big circle, do you have other picture about this work? Sorry, I'm too exigent. Just to show people how it's installed. Well, this is a big circle over 2 meters diameter. It's obviously a lighting installation. The sentence is a quote by Ingersoll: "We rise by lifting others," translated to Portuguese. Nos erguemos ao levantar outras pessoas. I adore the translation. And it's the final restitution of a long and difficult project. We carried on with a community, very big community. Cidade Tiradentes is the place, and it's in São Paulo, but it's a very, very big community. And because of the pandemic, we had to change the project 2 times. At the beginning, I would have liked to work with the School of Narrative Dance. Then something changed in all our lives. And I decided that knowing the people, the community, and for the all the information that I was able to collect, and also the vulnerability of certain groups within the community. It's a very, very big community, very dramatically affected by COVID, and with a lot of social issues that obviously sometimes always develop a sort of stigmatization of certain areas, but with something very intriguing for me, a very confusing, chaotic, but nevertheless significant desire to resist and make things for their people better. And so we worked with a local team, with a team from London, specialized in parkour, mindful movements, and meditation, and me in Italy, because of course it wasn't possible anymore to stay there and spend months of time as it was planned at the beginning. And I didn't want either to make the same project I had in mind, because something really, really changed. Ciao Neto, of course. We worked using Zoom platform in context where we didn't have not even the possibility to communicate with our participants through internet, because in a lot of situations people didn't have actually an internet connection. This is not something that everybody can afford there, not in the area for the people we worked with. And all the information, the gathering, it was everything extremely dispersive. So we had a local team recruiting people, talking with people, showing my previous project, translating for me because I'm not very good in Brazilian, and a team from London, because I envisioned among all the possible coaches and partners to develop this project, I envisioned that this group of people that are called Esprit Concrete, they work on art du déplacement. So it's a way of making parkour very much connected to community issues, social justice, and mental health. So we had the therapist also during all the sessions. And so through the body, we tried to provide and to create together with these people an experience that was far more significant than just storytelling through the body, and even more from the distance. Just to give you a rough sense of the complexity of the, not even of the project, just of the working every day, maybe I can show it, maybe after Jacopo finish his amazing presentation. I'm mesmerized by this biennial, Jacopo. I think it's fantastic and very, very emotional. I'm super, super proud to be part of it. But after that, I can just show you a few seconds of the Zoom session, just for you to understand how difficult.
But I finished. I think we should do that.
Are you sure? You finished? Sure.
Yeah, of course. Well, after you, what else can I show?
You are Italian in this, and you know that you are. Okay. So just for you to have a super rough and fast idea about how difficult was the communication because of lack of technology, of infrastructure. but also the fact that the coach were speaking in English. And then we needed a translation. And in order to have a proper translation, not abusive, not colonizing, and very much in tune with the practice with the body, we looked for people making parkour and very similar practice in São Paulo. So our translator weren't professional translator, but other practitioners at the end. And this helped a lot because they experienced in first degree this new method and this new approach to body with a special focus on resilience. So just very few seconds. No, this one, okay. Well, in Brazilian, this is just saying what we did. We did 20 workshops, and this is just a compilation of several.
How does she feel about the fact that she cannot do it?
Como é que você se sente pelo fato de você não conseguir fazer exatamente isso?
Eu queria fazer igual, né? A gente sente, assim, não é impotente, mas enfim, não consegue completar o exercício, fica faltando.
Okay.
Mas eu vou adiante, pode deixar.
So she really would like to do the same, and she feel empowered, but she will try it and she will do the best she can.
Zena is trying to break down the house.
Zena, você vai estar tentando quebrar a casa.
Janaina is literally making me feel fabulous.
Janaina, você vai ter que fazer com que a Castur se sinta maravilhosa.
Anna, movement, but absolute peace.
Ana, você vai estar se movimentando, mas uma plenidade.
Bom, Cida, parabéns.
Nice, Damiana. Yes, Mary.
Cida, você pensou em alguma coisa que seria mais fácil de ser feita, ao invés de ficar pensando no que seria mais difícil?
Não pensei nem no mais fácil, nem no mais difícil, mas eu acho que esses movimentos podem se tornar fáceis para nós fazer a partir do momento que a gente tiver um preparo.
So you see, every age, every relation with their own body, and the most important, when we think about parkour, we usually imagine flips and jumping from one building to another, and definitely this is an aspect of that, but this relation is very unique. It's the very first time that in an art project was used this method, because it's very much into mental health, and actually the result of all this amazing and difficult, I'm not going to lie, it was super difficult, very under pressure, everybody, super difficult because the lack of infrastructure. So it was definitely not easy for anybody. But the final result was this monument, this lighting installation that you saw, which creates a sort of space for things to happen still in the biennial pavilion. But even more important, a series of tutorials based on the topics, the vulnerability, the challenging, but also the pride of the people, their empowerment. And I'm going to show very soon because...
Hello, everyone. Oh, wow. You speak English, guys?
Vocês falam inglês? E ele convida vocês para descobrirem o prazer pela prática da arte do deslocamento. Vocês já conheciam ou a arte do deslocamento ou o parkour?
Yeah. There won't be any wrong in what you do. It's just what you do.
Não vai ter nada errado no que você estiver fazendo, vai ser só o que você estiver fazendo mesmo, entendeu?
Yeah. So do your best to do your best.
Faça o melhor que você tiver à sua mão, que você for capaz.
Yes, Paula.
Boa, Paula, parabéns.
Very good, Jessica.
Muito bom, Jéssica.
Oh, yes, Christian. Yes. In these fruits, you have to try to...
Daniel.
Yao, Guguri. Who's next?
Daniel. Oh, Daniel.
Who's next? It's me, Guguri.
No, Joel.
Jonas.
Okay, so for me it's very emotional till now. Well, anyway, now if you like, I'm going to show it super short, just 1 minute. One of the tutorial that came out from this. These are showed within the biennial under this big circle. And again, I want to reiterate that this big circle is a monument for people here and now for what they achieved. Even those movements that now just in my randomly edition seem naive, they weren't at all. The movement of parkour in this method, art du déplacement, are focused on the challenges that you can put on your path every day. But this is immediately translated from the body to your social life and always in contact with your community and in relation with other people. So just watch with me this tutorial and maybe you understand better what I mean.
The example in this video is merely an example provided to explain a concept that we hope you can take away and apply to your own context as and when you see fit. Sometimes things can feel overwhelming, impossible, unachievable. A great way to condition ourselves to survive these experiences is to put ourselves in a space where we physically challenge our body to do things we don't think it can. This physical representation helps our mental representation of this concept of impossibility. So choose a number, 11, 21, 31, 51, before you start training.
Excuse me, are you watching this?
No.
No, we can hear it though.
I forgot to share.
Yeah.
I was watching amazingly, but at a certain point I said, maybe I forgot something. I forgot you, sorry.
We could hear it so clearly, I thought maybe it was just audio.
No. Oh, I'm so dumb. Please excuse me. I'm really strange sometimes. Okay, now you see my desktop, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
The example in this video is merely an example provided to explain a concept that we hope you can take away and apply to your own context as and when you see fit. Sometimes things can feel overwhelming, impossible, unachievable. A great way to condition ourselves to survive these experiences is to put ourselves in a space where we physically challenge our body to do things we don't think it can. This physical representation helps our mental representation of this concept of impossibility. So choose a number, 11, 21, 31, 51, before you start training, and repeat the exercises of your choice that many times. At some point, if the number is big enough, you may come up against a wall. Different emotions might come up that are very challenging and very trying, and that's okay. Allow yourself to sit with them Allow your body to feel them. Allow those thoughts to come through your mind and pass you by as if they were cars on a road. Eventually, stand up, take a deep breath, shake your body out for a moment to get that blood pumping, and do one more movement. The concept here is that we always have one more in us, but we need to accept and acknowledge how we're feeling in that moment, and then commit to taking that extra step. Sometimes the only way to train for the impossible is to do what we perceive as impossible. Next time you're in a similar situation, give it a go. See how this fits you and how you can adapt it to you.
Okay, so this is just an example. Then in the course Building Communities, I will show all of this amazing tutorial. These were made in together with participants in a certain way, because the coaches of Parcours, Art du Déplacement, then developed this course starting from the topics emerged during the session. So in the Biennale, we have this in a big circle. Oh, these are other, sorry. Yeah, I have to share. I know, I have to share. I'm super dumb today. Let me check. Okay, this is a picture when you can see better the installation. So we have this huge circle, and then monitors with the different compilation of all the sessions, so people from the community can be represented and be visible. And there is also a special station for tutorial for people just jumping, just dropping at the Biennale that are keen to practicing and following this tutorial. Yeah, so in a certain way, the tutorial are for me super important because they allow us to make possible what I strongly believe, that only people can emancipate and empower other people. And contents, emotions, vulnerability, challenging, and also desire and wishes from one place very far away in a community super distant from yours can be in relation, linked to completely different community now and in the future. And this invisible link is very special. Yeah. Now there is a very nice development of this project, because through social network and all online platform you can find around, people are getting completely crazy about this big monument. And on a daily basis, I send to Jacopo all the messages and also the activities that they do there, which delivers even more also in Brazil, the idea that this monument work very well, because they create a sort of space that is perceived as a safe space by people, and also a space for belonging, which is my goal, and an extraordinary moment where you can challenge yourself. So the most strange things, even a few days ago, a sort of association of leaders in company, industries, etc., took this space to make a reunion. So I don't know how many times they do in a biennial, but they did. So definitely this has a sort of plaza meaning for a lot of people. And this is exactly what I think personally, also in contrast with all the white male and horrible monument all around the world that fortunately are being removing, even not enough and not everywhere. Yeah, so basically this was the project. Maybe now at this point, because it's already late, you don't want to have me talking about my practice, but maybe you are more curious to having a Q&A moment with Jacopo, and of course also with me if you want. So please don't hesitate to Neto left us, so I will be the the coordinator. So don't hesitate to write in chat, and or on the other way, just open the mic and ask whatever you want, please.
Marinella, do you want to stop sharing your screen so we can see each other?
This is great idea, because I was already forgetting. Because I look at myself and I say, okay, it's everything okay. Sorry, I'm very tired, or possibly it's just the way I am. Okay.
I have a question.
Thank you, Teresa. For whom?
I guess it's for both of you. First of all, so beautiful. Thank you, Jacobi, for walking us through the biennial. It's such a treat. We don't have to fly on the plane. We get to see this from the comfort of our own homes, and it's fascinating and amazing. And I just think you did such a beautiful job. For me, there's such an ethic of kindness and generosity and inclusivity in the work, and a concern for equality of representation, and it just feels so strong throughout, and very much including Marinella's work, which I love so much. And I guess maybe the question being just sort of like how you think about that curatorially. Where is that entering into the conversation? Because I think it's so important, not just politically, but just as ethical concerns as human beings of this planet.
Jacopo.
Well, that's like a big question. I think
it's too big.
Let's say, thinking about this biennial, I think it's a very generous biennial. I think that this reading that you do is very precise. And there's one thing that was very important for us that maybe I didn't mention, but I think it relates to what you were saying, this idea of trying to be generous and to be inclusive to the audience. And this idea of the audience in this specific biennial is a very complex one, if you want, because the biennial has, as an average, let's say, in the last editions, and I think this one might be a little bit less because of the COVID, but it doesn't look like it's going to be so much less. But it has an average of 600,000, 700,000 visitors. So it's a lot. It's really a lot of people. But I think where the real challenge lies is in the fact that this audience, apart from being very big, is very diverse. And so it's very difficult to do an exhibition that can really talk, if you want, to all those different audiences. And I think this is why from the beginning we came up with this idea of doing the exhibitions before, and also I think another thing that I didn't mention, do a very wide series of collaborations with institutions around town. Each of those institutions has had already a solo show of an artist who is also at the biennial. The idea behind this is always to create different layers, as many different layers as possible of reading of each work, because then we assume that who is more interested in curatorial practices, in contemporary art, will get more and more of those layers. But this sort of frees us also to do an exhibition which is very welcoming, I believe. Really, this is one of the things that I'm more proud of, if you want, in this exhibition. It's very welcoming to every audience. Like Marinella's work has really a very important place in the biennial in all senses. And it's a work like this. Everybody relates to that, you know, no matter if you're a very high-end curator from New York, or if you're somebody walking for the first time in your life into an art exhibition. And I think this is very special. And this is the kind of approach that we try to have in the exhibition as a whole. So there are, of course, things that are more complex and that demand in a way, or that make it easy for you to understand them if you are used to see contemporary art. But there's a lot of things that are not. And in that sense, I think that this idea of a generosity is present in the biennial. And the other sense that I think is also very relevant and that I'm also quite proud of is, and it also relates to generosity in a way, and it's something that actually I have to admit I only realized after the biennial opened and after things settled down a little bit and I was starting, to do guided tours and to talk a little bit about stuff, is that we really gave everything that we had, like we really worked a lot, and we worked a year more than you would normally work on a biennial. And this is of course due to very dramatic circumstances that we would have loved to avoid. But on the other hand, I also think that we had more time than people normally have. And this time that we had, I think it shows in the space, the way the works breathe, and a lot in the way the relations between the work are so carefully thought. It's like, for me, curatorially, this is the kind of exhibition that I like to see if it's a group show. I like to see works that are together because they actually make sense. This making sense doesn't mean that they say the same thing. They might be entirely contradicting one with the other, but they do belong together in the sense that when you're trying to make sense of that part of the exhibition, at least, you see that there is a connection. You see that all the wall text, all the labels, they're carefully done. They took time. And really, I think that what we did was kind of insane. It's like we did an exhibition that you don't even see so often, but that wouldn't be so exceptional, I think, if it was a 500 square meters exhibition, but it's a 30,000 square meters exhibition. And the kind of treatment that we had with all the works and all the artists and ultimately with the audience was the one that, many, many times we said, this is going to give us way more work, but it's the best way to do it. We always did it. I'm saying this because, of course, I wouldn't say it so straightforwardly in a more open space. Like Neto said, we're all, you are, I'm not, but most of us at his or her own home, so we can talk as friends. And as friends, I can say I'm very proud of that because I think this is not what you usually see. Usually on an event, Marinella knows just about how stressful it was to do her work. And this is multiplied 90 artists, of course, some more, some less. But we never, not even once, I think, said, no, this is going to give us too much work. No, let's not do it. We always went for it. And I think that this really shows in the exhibition. And this is probably the best way I can answer to your, not really a question, but your idea of how generosity was in place. Because this is what, as curators, as artists, I think this is what we can really give, right?
I can add something to what you say, and then maybe adding even more something on participatory project that have something to do with generosity. So first of all, I think that this biennial maybe could teach how to, but I don't think art system will follow this, but how things can be done with less chaotic and stressful rhythm that is imposed by capitalistic standards, while biennial should have a meaning that is different from a private space showing something, and so that things with time and dedication can be extremely more compelling. But I don't think that it's also only a matter of time. Honestly, the presence of indigenous artists is itself something extremely important on a political level, but in my opinion is even more the way you showed indigenous artists, without any colonization, any abusive attitude, not even curatorial one. So there is a huge difference that is the attitude of curating, and not just because you and the other curator are my friends, but also because this is a matter of fact, and I guess everybody can relate to what I'm saying. And the third, and not least, this is a generous biennial for every kind of audience, because there is not a distinction between level A, level B of culture, and it's very respectful of people and audience. And even when you see Ligia Pape, and maybe I need to know something to better understand her work or other more conceptual work, there is art. There is the artwork. There is no the absence of the artwork. And when it comes to art and activism, this is something I'm going to push a lot also during our course. Unfortunately, very often you don't enjoy anymore. And you are so obsessed and so into the practice, especially when it touches social justice, political decolonization, and a lot of other topics. And then there is the perception of people, the relation with people, which is made also through our languages, the shapes, the form, the materials, the contents, everything together, the sound, the colors. So in this flow, and this flow is very important. And what people are demanding, especially since the pandemic, but we had with Jacopo this conversation very often, they want to see beauty. They want to see something poetic. And what is the leitmotif, the fil rouge in this biennial is that is the poetry, in my opinion. Even when you touch very complicated and not easy to be touched the topics, like certain approach to indigenous art, which in my opinion are more colonialist than others, no? And in this case, unfortunately, there is not this risk at all. But when it comes to participatory art and community-based project, I think, at least on my point of view, from my point of view, there is a lack of a very key ingredient. A few projects don't care at all about the audience who is not participating. And this is not correct, in my opinion. So you make participatory art at this high extent when you don't make something exclusively, not even for your participants. So having in mind the relation that you can create, that's why I say participation is not just a methodology, it's also a content. And it's a theoretical content that must be developed and worked more and more. So it's not easy to make this kind of art because you try to don't be exclusive in the way you pick your participant. Maybe you are extremely exclusive with the audience because you make something that only the participant can relate to. But this is a very big door. I don't want to open and close this door now. We will have time with with the people I have the fortune to be in contact with this course. But it can be also an open discussion we can have through our channel or in one of our crew, because I think it's game changing. And the tea time began later, so we can maybe discuss this during our tea time. But
Marinella, I don't want to cut you off, but you can continue. I have to go for tea time, and others can join me later. But thank you so much.
No. We have to go to tea time all together. So we need somebody to say stop. Unfortunately, there is no NATO. He was very good to say, okay, it's finished. But thank you for people that stay with us over 1 hour. Thank you very much. But it's such a passionate discussion. We should talk about these things because are so contemporary, are so urgent to be addressed. But this is also my way to be. So sorry. Jacopo, thank you very much for being with us. I'm sure that we will talk extensively about this presentation with all artists in the coming days. And thank you all people that I don't know and the people that I know and I see here. And let's go to the tea time. So we must go to the tea time sometime. So thank you very much. And for the artists that I meet on Monday, we see next week. Bye.
Teaching artists around the world. Artists around the world. Teaching artists around